Well, Tommy, thank you very much for speaking with us today at FandomWire. We really enjoy Chucky. We really enjoy Doc of Chucky. So I guess the biggest question for me is you've made a handful of these really long documentaries that are really insightful into how these horror franchises are created. What about Chucky specifically made you want to investigate the Child's Play Chucky series?
After doing Elm Street and Friday the 13th and Scream and Return of the Living Dead and then some other things in the smaller form,
Hmm.
it really became a question of what's left. What's really left to explore
Hmm.
in that big multi-hour space that hasn't been done.
Hmm.
And Child's Play and Chucky came up because while there had been bonus features and things like that, there hasn't been this kind of big through line
Hmm.
multi-hour thing where you have, segment one, segment two, segment three, that kind of thing. So that's really where it came from, was just the practicality of it's not really been done and it's a fantastic franchise. Why
Yes.
haven't we done?
Well, and one of the things that I love is how many of the people that you get to come back after all of these movies. Was there anybody in particular that you were, one, very excited to talk to, or two, were worried you weren't going to be able to get?
I mean, it for me when I do these, it always starts sort of kind of at the top.
Mhm.
I went right to David Kirshner and Don Mancini
Yep.
first because if they weren't involved and they didn't want to do it, I feel like all the other dominoes would have just fallen down in a bad way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I was really excited to talk to them in general because they're incredible human beings and they're incredibly talented and they have this legacy that they've created. So I was excited to talk to them. And when they said they were interested in interviewing, it just kind of opened up the world of, okay, we feel legitimate. Like we don't feel like we're these people off to the side. We can now tell people, oh, we've already spoken to so and so and so and so. And then
Hmm.
people started signing on. I mean, I would be crazy not to say it was fantastic and crossing fingers that I get to talk to Brad Dourif.
Right. Yeah, I
You
mean,
know, I
and
mean,
Brad's so funny in the movie too. Like he gets plenty of one-liners in there, even though, he's famous for playing this character, but it's always fun to see him one step removed from Chucky as well.
and that was the interesting thing about wanting to speak to him was kind of diving into obviously Chucky is a persona and personas are oftentimes part of people. So
Mhm.
you can tell that he thinks a lot about the character and he understands it in ways that we may never. So that was really cool to just to be able to talk to him about that. I mean, Jennifer Tilly, I
Yeah.
mean, of course I want to talk to Jennifer Tilly.
I mean, who
So
doesn't?
I know she was fantastic. Everyone we interviewed was just incredible. Like everyone brought like such an A game to wanting to uncover things with us. And that was the exciting part, was it didn't feel like an interview. It felt like a conversation and they really wanted to bring forward like, did you know? And I'm like, oh, this is great. You're making it even easier because I didn't know and you're following up on something else. So, I mean, everyone in the show we were lucky to get. I mean, we were so thankful. Some people have never talked about it ever, and some people hadn't talked about it since their movie release. So we were
Yeah.
just glad to have gotten everyone, but uh, it was just fantastic to be able to talk to such a wide breadth of people behind the scenes and in front of the camera to kind of make sure that the story that we're weaving together actually gets told in a way that makes sense.
And one of the things that I thought you did a really good job of, speaking of things you never really had heard of before, was the Tom Holland, Don Mancini, I want to say antagonistic relationship because I was really surprised with how open and honest they both were about that process. Um, how did you guys go about getting them to open up about that kind of conflict at the heart of the first movie?
I'm always sensitive to things that can be perceived as, overly negative or
Hmm.
hurting someone. So I'm always cautious about the topics that I want to talk about. And I do kind of let them know things that we'll cover. I'm trying to think that conflict wasn't new to audiences. I don't
Right.
think it had been out there in a way. I know that there was an oral history at one point, and there were certainly things said. So it made that a little easier because we weren't
Hmm.
putting people on the spot and we weren't asking them necessarily to reveal something that no one had known existed.
True.
I was trying to be, again, gentle and cautious in bringing up the things that I had researched and the things that I had known, and getting them to talk about things that maybe weren't exactly out in the open in a way that is illuminating but not hurtful. And
Yeah.
I feel like that line can be tough to walk, but because of their assistance in a way, in the way that they were feeling free enough to talk about things, I think that we can get that story across, tell it in a way that makes the context understandable because it's a very
Yes.
important part of the making of that first movie. And I feel like
Mhm.
to have not talked about it would have just opened up the can of worms like, well, they missed this. It's like, I didn't want to be that person to not uncover something that needed to be covered,
Yeah.
but I want to do it in a way that's sensitive because there's no reason to exploit something, but there's
Mhm.
also reasons to talk about it. So
Yeah, and I think you do walk that line just perfectly well where, I understand completely where both of them are coming from, and it's never like a blame game. It's just more of this was the situation. And for me, it was new for me, but I do know that other people who I've talked to were aware of it. So yeah, it was a really great job that you got them to speak as openly about it as you did.
thank you.
There was also a big question that I had was obviously the sequel series has come out over the last few years and has been extremely popular in horror fans, especially for Chucky fans. Was there ever a discussion to include that in the film?
There was a discussion and we chose not to only because the series was still going. So
Yeah, that's fair.
it didn't feel like something to cover as a legacy in a way
That
because
makes
it was
sense.
still literally ongoing. And I believe my timing might be off because the show took 4 years to make, I think.
Yes.
I believe that the series had been announced or was in production when we started, putting this all together.
Hmm.
And then when we were wrapped, the final season was in production. So we didn't
Hmm.
know how far it was going to go, and we didn't want to kind of touch on something and then not know where it's going to go. And with the
Yeah.
movies, while there's certainly obviously a huge open door for new movies, and we all hope that
Hmm.
there will be new movies, at this point, I felt strongly enough that we can cover the seven movies and tell that story as a look back now. And if
Hmm.
there's ever another movie, maybe there'll be something else, an addendum, Doc of Chucky too.
Fair
But
enough.
until that point, I feel like that this seven feature look is a nice way to kind of shine a light on that legacy as it is thus far.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people really see the Mancini series as the perfect version of it. Was there any discussion to include the 2019 version with Aubrey Plaza and everybody else, or was that pretty much off the out of the legacy side of it when you guys
I
were making
feel
it?
like the I feel like the discussion probably went something like, someone asking, should we include? And I said no.
I mean that's
And it's
reasonable. It
not
is very much outside of the lore that you guys were covering in Doc of Chucky.
exactly. I mean, that's the thing. Doc of Chucky, I mean, literally, Doc of Chucky, it's about the character of
Mhm.
Chucky as much as it is about the making of the movies that character is in. And to have that sidebar I feel like would have been such a turn. Not that that movie probably isn't worth exploring on its own merits.
Mhm.
I'm sure there's amazing things to talk about the making of that movie and why it exists and how it exists and the battles in between. But it didn't fit in what we were trying to do. And again, the through line for me, which I think we are all lucky that we have this franchise the way we do, is Don Mancini.
Yeah,
Like I didn't want to leave that road because to me that's the journey I was interested in taking and I was interested in taking viewers on was sort of the Don Mancini slash David Kirshner Chucky franchise movies. So that remake, reiteration, whatever people want to call it, just it wasn't part of the story that I was telling.
that's reasonable. The other big question I had was which of the movies do you think needed the most coverage to help kind of push it back into critical reappraisal? Because obviously, Seed of Chucky and Bride of Chucky have had a lot of controversy around them in the past. Was there any particular one that you wanted to go to bat for in the making of this movie?
I think it's the first segment on Child's Play is the longest because it sets the universe up and things like that. But Seed of Chucky was absolutely one
Hmm.
that I took care. I would say is a good word, when we were putting it together, because I wanted to make sure that it wasn't dismissed the way a lot of people, when that movie came out, dismissed it.
Hmm.
I want people, and I say this a lot, I want people who watch these documentaries to not just be entertained by the documentary, to not just be like, that's really great. I now know how they did that. I want people to rewatch some of these movies with a different eye, through a different
Yeah,
lens. I want them to understand that movie through the intention of the filmmakers and the cast and through the time in which it was made versus how we look at things now. And Seed of Chucky to me was important because it was made at a time that was the biggest swing. I mean, not just for that
huge one, a
franchise.
huge swing.
That was a huge swing in
Yeah.
horror in jet. That was a huge swing in movies, practically, the way that they tackled that subject and
Hmm.
with those characters and with a killer doll. So I'm hoping that people will really look at that one and go back and be like, okay, you know what? I get it now. Like a lot of people get it now, right? But
Yes.
I
Yeah.
want people who didn't get it then and maybe don't even get it now to dust that one off and give it the chance that I think it needs. I mean, you bring up Bride. I think you can watch Bride again and enjoy it on an entirely different level. It was already so fantastic.
Hmm.
But the way everyone talks about how it's such a reinvention, I feel like people sort of forget. They say, oh, yeah, it reinvented the franchise. But what does that mean? Then you hear all these
Yeah.
stories about what that reinvention meant. Watching Bride of Chucky again through the even the lens of hearing Ronnie, you talk about it again, lets you watch it in a different way. And I think Seed though is definitely the one that I'm hoping people really give it that shake that it needs because it's important. Child's Play 3 as well,
Hmm.
because of some of the revelations from some of the cast about their characters
Yep.
and what they were bringing to it and why, and how viewers will not have seen that unless you watch what they're saying and go back and go, oh my God, there it is there. I never would have known that. And again, I hope people are entertained by the show, but I do want them to pull something from what we put together so they can enjoy the movies in an entirely new way.
One of the other things that I thought was very like a cool through line that you share with Don Mancini is you started, with Crystal Lake Memories and Never Sleep Again as the writer, and eventually moved into the director's chair like Mancini does. Did you find that parallel track during the course of the movie? Do you find that ironic, I guess?
I mean, it's something that I mean, I've thought about in like this tiny way because,
Mhm.
obviously Don Mancini has a film franchise and television series, and yes, sign me up. Um, but I like the idea of that trajectory because I feel like as a writer, you can't not see what you're putting on paper.
Mhm.
It's hard, it's always hard to give up your child to someone else to have them bring it to life. I see things one way, and then you, as the director, are going to do something that works, sure, but
Mhm.
it's not at all what I envisioned. And I think with this one, I really wanted, I knew what I wanted to do. I knew what
Mhm.
I wanted to try and say and what I wanted to ask and bring out of these people. So I think it was just organic. I don't know that I would have been able to sit back and just let someone else do this one.
Okay.
I think that the Child's Play film franchise is so interesting, again, because you have that one voice
Hmm.
over the whole thing, but each movie is so singular yet connected. The tissue that runs through it is so Don Mancini, and it's always what you want, and at the same time, completely unexpected. So with this one, I wanted to make sure that that all came through. It was just so in my mind to cover this franchise a certain way. I felt if I don't do it, I'll probably be bummed out that I didn't do it.
That's reasonable. So obviously, you've done Jason, you've done Chucky, you've done Freddy Krueger. Is there another horror icon franchise that you're looking to potentially work on in the future, or is there already one that you're in production on that we can announce?
I mean, covering the first Scream was great. I mean, I really enjoyed doing that
Yeah,
and on that show for Inside Story. I would love to do the Scream franchise. I mean,
yeah.
from beginning to, I don't know when it will end, but at some point it may. I would
Hmm.
love to cover that because that also has a fantastic trajectory with Wes doing a trilogy and then the fourth film. So you have your quadrilogy. And
Yep.
And then, you have this new set of directors coming in to do their thing and put their stamp on it, yet you still have the Kevin Williamson through line. I think there's a
Yeah.
story there. I think with the Nev Campbell of it all and all of
Hmm.
that going on, and with the character and how important she is to that franchise, and how what she did was so important, I think, not just for her, but for the business, and the statement that that made and why it worked out the way it worked out is important. I think there's a big story to tell with that franchise that one day, of course, I would love to do that, and we'll see if that remains to be seen. Yeah.
Well, hey, I know a lot of my horror friends, when they heard that this was coming, are over the moon excited for it. So good luck this week. I know a lot of people who are going to be tuning in on day one. So we're very excited to
I'm
see
excited.
more Chucky stuff. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your
Thank
day.
you so much. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah.
Take care.